Welcome back to CBS Sports HQ. Let's talk about the coaching carousel that has been spinning around the NFL. There are 5 head coaching jobs that are up for grabs right now, and these are them and who has been out. So Cliff Kingsbury out as the Cardinals head coach there. Lovie Smith finishing the season 3-13-1 for the Texans. Broncos getting rid of Nathaniel Hackett. Panthers getting Matt Rule out after a 1-4 start. And then the Colts getting rid of Frank Reich, Jeff Saturday as the interim coach there. We got Brady Quinn still in studio with us and Rick Spielman hanging out to talk about how we can fix each of these teams and who the ideal candidate is for each of those head coaching jobs. Not a huge feat, right?
Well, I was just going to start by saying this to Rick. I mean, don't you love when people are telling you back when you were in that position, hey, how do you fix your franchise? Don't you love that when you hear the media talking about it?
Yeah, well, I tuned into CBS HQ to get all the answers that I needed. So as long as I had that.
I was going to say, from Pete Prisco in particular, right? That was always what Pete had to say.
God. Worst GM ever if he ever had to get a job.
Man,
you
we're like
Jeff Saturday
2 minutes into this segment, and we're already throwing Pete under the bus. Okay, so we're going to start off with the Broncos. Obviously, Russ Wilson and the Broncos have just been bad this year, to say the least. Brady, how do you fix this Broncos team, and does it entail doing high knees on the plane, yes or no?
Well, I don't think they play in London this year, and he's not going to be battling through an injury, so I'm not sure that's in the cards for them. But I do think it starts with Russell Wilson. How do you get Russell Wilson back to playing as a player that was thought of to be an MVP caliber player? Clearly that wasn't the case this year, whether it was the offense, the play calling. I mean, Nathaniel Hackett even gave up those duties at one point. That really didn't change things. It could have just been the transition. First year in a new system after playing in Seattle for such a long period of time. Sometimes it's hard for a quarterback to get that down, along with the chemistry and rapport you have with the guys you're throwing to. Whatever the case may be, that has to be the top priority, is fixing Russell Wilson and maximizing his talent and his ability. The next thing is you got to maintain the defense. I mean, you go back before even Nathaniel Hackett was hired. Vic Fangio helped really keep things kind of afloat with the way their defense played in games, despite the quarterback play. And he just kind of said on his way out, we're a quarterback away. Well, I think everyone assumed that once Russell Wilson got there, the playoffs were going to come. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. However, the defense still played really well. So they've got to maintain a high level of play on defense. I think you still have to continue to build on the offensive line and build that ground attack too. And then that maybe goes hand in hand with helping to fix Russell Wilson. But I'm curious to get Rick's thoughts because, Rick, they went defensive-minded in Vic Fangio, his first time as a head coach. Then they go to an offensive-minded coach, young guy, first time as a head coach, Nathaniel Hackett. Neither has obviously worked out. Where do you see them going here?
I think, and you're going to hear the Sean Paytons of the world and the maybe the Jim Harbaughs of the world, but I do think they need a veteran coach to come in, a veteran coach that can handle Russell Wilson, because when you look at when you're on the outside looking in and hearing some of the things that come out of the building, and it's great that he has an office and this and that, but in my mind, I would lean towards, in this scenario, is a Dan Quinn or a Raheem Morris. I think both of them have head coaching experience. Both of them know offense and defensive football. I mean, Raheem saw what Sean McVay did when they traded for Matthew Stafford and how that worked out. But they have to have someone with credibility that comes into that locker room in those players' eyes. And I think both of these guys, one's a Super Bowl winner, one got a team to a Super Bowl, both very strong leaders, both player-oriented type coaches. And I think both of them can get Russell Wilson on track, depending on who they put as their offensive coordinator and on the offensive side of the ball.
Let's talk about the Cardinals finishing the season 4-13. Cliff Kingsbury, he's out. There's also been talks about possibly trading DeAndre Hopkins. What do you think Arizona's priorities should be in the offseason, Brady?
Well, it's really interesting because it really comes down to, and I guess Rick could better speak to this, depending on who they hire and how they go about hiring both head coach and general manager, given that that's where this thing is at right now. You have to look at the roster. I mean, this is a roster with 28 unrestricted free agents. I mean, that is a ridiculous amount of players to turn over. And that doesn't even include guys like Hopkins, who you mentioned, who might be on the trade block, other players with a year left on their contract that the team might move on from. So there's a lot of roster rebuilding here. I think an optimist would say that's a good thing. You can turn this thing around quick in regards to who you sign, depending on how much cap space you've got, along with the draft class. The next thing is whoever that coach is, whether it's a defensive-minded head coach or an offensive-minded head coach, To me, you got to figure out the Kyler Murray situation and, whether or not they're willing to build an offense out around his skill set. He's very unique, right? He's a smaller quarterback that can run extremely well. If you go back to the decision to hire Cliff Kingsbury and draft Kyler Murray #1 overall, they were a hand-in-hand fit. I mean, Cliff had helped recruit him to Texas A&M back during his college football days, and so he knew the type of system and offense he wanted to run with Kyler Murray. I don't know that the next coach is necessarily going to be looking at that as quite the same advantage, given his height and size, and sometimes it's a struggle to play from the pocket with all of that. So how they go about handling Kyler Murray is going to be another thing. And the last thing is they've got to find edge pressure. The future Hall of Famer J.J. Watt, he's retiring. Another Hall of Famer, Chandler Jones, they let move on. They thought Marcus Golden would replace him this past year. He didn't have quite that same sack production. They do have some young talent there. Zach Allen's a really good player. Majay Sanders is a good player. They just drafted 2. He's still developing. And then Cam Thomas, another player to keep an eye on. But that group, they've got to find a way of getting more pressure, more sacks, whoever the head coaching hire ends up being.
Yeah, and Rick, with all that in mind, especially what Brady was talking about with Kyler Murray, who do you think Arizona should be looking for their new head coaching position?
Yeah, no, this is a situation. I think if I was in Arizona and I was hiring a head coach, I'd go out and do whatever I could to get Sean Payton. Because of his ability to work with Kyler Murray and all the things that you hear about, even back to when, hey, we got to put this addendum in his contract so we make sure he does enough film study. Sean Payton has done an excellent, even when they brought Breeze to New Orleans and they play indoors. Breeze was a Hall of Famer because he was under Sean Payton. And I think Sean Payton has enough street cred and enough credibility to walk in there and demand respect from Kyler Murray. And what I would tell him is, listen, I know you're a good football player. We are married to you for the next 4 or 5 years of the contract they gave, but listen to me and I can get you to the level you need to get to.
Moving on to the Colts now. Brady right now, Jeff Saturday, he was hired pretty early on. What was it, week 10, I guess, for replacing Frank Wright. They've had 3 different quarterbacks that they've started. So what does Indy need to do to kind of right the ship, I guess, obviously starting at the quarterback position?
Outside the obvious is they've got to find a head coach who wants to come in there and deal with Jim Irsay as the owner. I know this probably sounds a little negative, but it seemed a little crazy, just the overall hiring of Jeff Saturday in the first place and how maybe that was taken with the rest of the staff that was currently there. But you first got to figure out who wants that job right now. It's one where you're hearing Sean Payton being up for all these other jobs. Haven't heard him talk to the Colts yet. I wonder why that is. But the first thing they're going to have to do, whoever the coach is you got to find a QB. Bottom line is they've gone the veteran route a number of times. It has not worked out. The draft is where they're going to be looking. And you've already heard their general manager, Chris Ballard, say he's going to do whatever it takes to get up to #1. And I think I have an idea on who he's going to take in Bryce Young, the former quarterback at Alabama and Heisman winner. The next thing is they got to fix their offensive line. And I'm not saying they need a wholesale change. That's a good group. But there's a disconnect. They faced some injuries too. That's part of it. But that group, they were really led by their offensive line offensively. And whether it was pass protection, even the run blocking, it just wasn't quite the same. And you obviously saw Jonathan Taylor with an injury this year, but they need to get him going as well. And the last thing I just say is they've got to find better interior defensive play on their D-line. They gave up way too many yards against the run this year. The secondary actually did all right. They got pressure for the most part too. It's just giving up too much on the ground. So as far as the next head coach, Rick, I mean, I don't know. I'd love to hear you answer the question of what that looks like with a guy like Jim Irsay, considering he's got this perception that he's a little bit crazy sometimes.
Well, you can throw my ideal marriage would be for Irsay would be Jim Harbaugh because he played there. If you look how Jim Harbaugh has won games, not only at the NFL level, but when he's at Michigan, they've always relied on a strong run game. They always play good defense. And when Indy is rolling, they rely on the run game. They have a premier back in Jonathan Taylor. They always have played solid defense. They got good pieces on that side of the ball. You can add a mix. They have to go get a franchise quarterback. But Jim Harbaugh, to me, is similar to John Harbaugh and how they win games in Baltimore. And if Jim can be there, help select whoever's selecting the next franchise quarterback, hopefully, if I was in this position and Chris Ballard, this is the last time I'm going to be picking up this high in the draft in the first round. So I do have to take advantage of making sure we hit on our next franchise quarterback. And I think Jim Harbaugh, with his history there as a player, with his coaching style, and with the way Indy is built and the way he has won games in the NFL, I think this would be a perfect fit.
He's also done a great job of developing young quarterbacks. I mean, you see the development or maturation of J.J. McCarthy just this year at Michigan, but even during his time in the NFL too, and kind of bringing on Colin Kaepernick the way he played early on under Jim Harbaugh. So Alex Smith will be another quarterback you throw in that conversation. So there is something to be said too for if you're drafting one, Jim Harbaugh's done a good job with developing those guys, putting them in a good system.
Let's talk about another team that could use a franchise QB. The Texans, they're almost the worst team in the league. There was talks that they were going to get the #1 draft pick. Now they're officially getting the #2 right now. Our friend Ryan Wilson, he's predicting that Bryce Young is going to go #2 overall to the Texans. Now, Houston, do they start with the franchise QB? And then if Bryce Young is still there, still on the board, is he the guy to kind of turn around the franchise and build it around him?
He's the guy, in my opinion.
Okay.
Now, I know people are going to have the reservations because of his size, but the reality is, I think when you put on the tape and you watch the way he plays, that game translates to the NFL level. And he's not a guy that, I think when you go back and watch some of the tape from Tua, who had the ability to improvise, extend plays, he still took a number of hits, and he was injured often at Alabama. You don't see that quite as much with Bryce Young, even with the more slender frame. He does a good job of getting down, getting out of bounds, getting the ball out of his hand as good as anyone I think I've seen in probably the past 2 decades just following football. So I'm a huge Bryce Young fan. I think he would be the guy that the Houston Texans would take if he was there at 2. I just worry about whether or not he'll be there at 2. But not to get off too long-winded on that, I mean, the first thing you need to hire at a head coach, you need to provide stability at the head coaching position. You've had 2 head coaches in 2 years. Not only is it going to be hard to recruit free agents for that who want to come along to be a part of the rebuilding process, but just anyone who's taking this organization seriously, at some point, you got to let the guy be there for a few years and see what that coach is able to build. So whoever they end up hiring, I hope they give them a little bit more of a runway. The next is finding a quarterback like we talked about with Bryce Young. And finally, they've got to figure out a way of upgrading this roster as much as they can. They've got a ton of cap space. There's a lot to build upon, I think, along with Bryce Young. And so whoever comes in as the head coach, Rick, I think they're going to have a great chance of not necessarily turning this thing around fast, but at least in the next couple of years, showing some improvements and improving this roster as a whole.
Yeah, Rick, who do you think is the right fit for Houston and can stay there for a couple of seasons and bring some consistency to the Texans?
If they're going to go in a total rebuild, what they're doing right now, and they go out and get a franchise quarterback, to me, the most qualified guy out there is bring in a young coach that is a dynamic leader. And to me, that's DeMeco Ryans from the San Francisco 49ers. You can see what he's done on a defensive side. But talking to a lot of people that interviewed him last year, his presence, his command of a room when he's in there, what he's done for San Francisco's defense has been tremendous. Let him grow with this young roster and let them grow together. Now, you're going to have some patience, but knock off the franchise quarterback, and I'm all in on Bryce Young. But get a DeMeco Ryans who played there. Now, I don't know if there was any hard feelings because he was a very good player there, but when he left, but I would imagine if he had a chance to go back to a team that drafted him and he played very well there and went to Pro Bowls there and had an opportunity to go lead that franchise, let him grow as a head coach, help him put the staff together, let him grow with a young franchise quarterback and see where this goes. But the only way you're going to get more consistency and continuity is to not change your head coach every year.
And to Rick's point about being a former player, you got something to sell to the Houston Texans fan base right now. I think there's a lot of frustrated people with this organization. You bring back one of your own, a guy who made Pro Bowls, is a great player for you. It's something to sell, something to market out there too. I think the Houston Texans need badly.
I think another franchise. We have a couple Carolina Panthers fans that are in the building here. I know Zach is a big fan, and he desperately wants a QB, a winning season, all the things. They're taking out Matt Rule after week 5. He is out. Steve Wilks is in as the interim. Also, a lot of questions at QB. Baker, Sam Darnold, who is it going to be there? Brady, how do you fix that Panthers team?
Well, it's not going to be Baker. It's not there.
Yeah, no.
It's really down to if they feel like they've seen enough from Sam Darnold to give him a potential shot. More than likely than not, they're going to go back. They're going to go to the draft. They've kind of gone the veteran route, too, when you look through the years between Teddy Bridgewater, Baker, Sam Darnold, all the guys on that line, even P.J. Walker, who came in and knew Matt Rule back from his college days. They've gone that route. It hasn't worked. So you expect them to go back to the draft. And that's the first thing, though, is figure out the quarterback position. And look, maybe David Tepper, who seems really impatient, doesn't want to go in the draft. Maybe he wants to go to the free agent. See if you can get a Derek Carr, a Jimmy Garoppolo, whoever else you're trying to entice potentially via a trade that's a veteran quarterback. But it's that, and they got to build and give whoever that quarterback is more offensive firepower. The bottom line is they've got some pieces there, not quite enough. They continue to build around the offensive line to protect that position and then maintain the defense. The defense is a solid roster top to bottom. They've got some stars, and they played at a really high level. And Steve Wilks deserves a lot of credit for the job he did stepping in there and taking over. I wish they'd give Steve Wilks more of a look. I thought he got jobbed during his time with the Arizona Cardinals in only 1 year's time, given those circumstances. And when he took over, he got this team to play hard and play for him. So there's something to be said for that. But Rick, again, another team that you can make the case of looking for a quarterback, but you also have that owner that, he kind of pitched Matt Rule on, hey, a 4 or 5 year plan, and ends up pulling the rug from out from underneath him into that third year.
Yeah, and you look, it's like everyone needs a quarterback we just talked about on the roster except two, and both of those quarterbacks struggled. But I'm a huge fan of Steve Wilks. I think he deserves an opportunity to lead that franchise. When you read the comments from the players, when you watch the effort and energy that they play with, even though they were technically out of it, he fought and that team fought their way back into it. I understand it's the NFC South, but was down to the second to the last week 17, where they could have won this division after being in such a low spot. So kudos to him for his leadership, and I think the players buy into what he's selling down in that locker room. If you go with a Steve Wilks, you have to get the quarterback situation done. I think they're done going the free agent route and trying to get a veteran. They've done that 3 or 4 times, almost like Indy. They just can't get settled in that position. So I wouldn't be surprised if they get very aggressive to try to get their way up into the draft to get this issue solved. It seems like their ownership wants this resolved, and they want a young franchise quarterback to go forward. But if Steve Wilks has an opportunity to keep this job, I don't have any question about his leadership. My question would be, then who would he go get to be the offensive coordinator? Does he keep Ben McAdoo? Would a Frank Reich, who I saw also interviewed for that job, could he be a potential offensive coordinator if Steve Wilks teams up with him? So I think Steve deserves the opportunity. They have to go get a young franchise quarterback. And whoever Steve puts over there as the offensive coordinator, I think is the best direction to go with the Carolina Panthers.
And a quick note on Carolina, just seeing reports that they're requesting permission to interview Gerard Mayo from the Patriots for that head coaching job. All right, Rick Spielman, Brady Quinn here with us in studio, breaking down the very latest on the NFL coaching carousel. You can also hear Rick alongside Ryan Wilson on their podcast With the First Pick. In the very latest episode, the guys are talking about what the Jets might do in the upcoming draft, and also Ryan Wilson's favorite topic, Anthony Richardson, where he could land. You can download and listen wherever you get your podcasts. You can also scan the QR code on your screen.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.